while Keynesian economics seemed to be the magical cure to our economic problems, it was actually very weak in four main areas, and we looked at those at the last part of our lesson last time. And we noted that the first problem were time lags or lapses between seeing the need, implementing a solution, and then actually feeling the effect in our economy. But the fourth problem, which we were focusing on, was the idea of where do we get the additional money to fund government spending, fund those programs, the government-initiated programs. We noted that the spending, the money, comes from taxing, from borrowing, or from using monetary policies. And I mentioned that monetary policies are the ones that we usually stay away from because they encourage inflation in our economy. So now we're going to look at taxation and then borrowing. Now we know that taxing and spending actually offset each other, meaning that it makes any changes to the economy of no effect because they counter each other. For example, let's use our previous MPC work where the government spends $10 billion to increase the economy to $100 billion by the expenditure multiplier. Now, of course, that would greatly increase our economy. It would also provide a number of available jobs and help to lower the unemployment rate. But there is also an opportunity cost from adding that $10 billion to our economy. We have to know where did that $10 billion come from in the first place. And it is the origin of that $10 billion that actually provides the opportunity cost for our economy. You see, if the original $10 billion from the government put into our economy came from personal taxes, that means that someone's income actually went down because of increased taxes in order to provide this extra money, these new jobs, for another person to increase their income. So it's balanced out, it's offset with one another. Then too, if the $10 billion came from corporate taxes, that means that businesses have less money, had to give up money that they would have used to pay employees, to increase production, and eventually cause the GDP to go down. So taxes, as the form of or the source of government spending, have the opportunity cost of taking money from other parts of our economy in order to inject it into another part of the economy. Now, Adam Smith had this to say about taxation. There is no art which one government sooner learns of another than that of draining money from the pockets of the people. Now, this quotation from the founder of laissez-faire economics is probably speaking what most people think when it comes to the issue of taxes, draining money from people's pockets in order to provide money for the government. However, we must remember that actually taxation is the means of covering expenses that a government incurs. So we have to have taxes in order to pay for the expenses that a government incurs or creates because it is trying to provide particular services, protection, or legal services for its people, for its citizens. So a government is established to provide certain services for its citizens. Where does it get the money to provide those services? Those services must be paid for in some fashion, and that is where taxes come into play. Taxes provide the revenue necessary to cover the expenses necessary for a government to operate. We have to remember that since the 1930s, though, the U.S. government has actually taken steps to use taxation as part of its fiscal policy, using taxes as a means to increase government spending, to inject money into our economy to help it grow, to help even out the business cycles. So no longer, since the 1930s, is taxation the main means of providing revenue for the government. It is now part of the fiscal policy. Now, in 2003, the U.S. government received a total of over $2 trillion in taxes. Taxes from personal income, from corporate taxes, Social Security taxes, and then other smaller miscellaneous taxes that maybe not everyone has to pay. Now, then federal tax revenue is broken down into various different categories or budget categories that contribute to the various percentages of the federal income, the federal government's income. We can break down that tax revenue in this way. We have individual income taxes bringing in 46%, the largest part of our national income or government income. Social Security taxes make up 36%, although now there is a lot of concern that we are not getting enough Social Security taxes coming in to sufficiently cover those who are needing Social Security. Then we also have 6% for corporate taxes, 4% for excise taxes, and then there's miscellaneous or leftover taxes bringing about 5% or making up 5% of our government income. Now, if we take those percentages, those major categories of taxes and the income, the revenue that they provide, we can then break those down into particular tax sources, and we can examine exactly where those taxes come from and how they are paid by individual citizens. We can look at them in more detail. First of all, let's take a look at personal income taxes, since that is the largest category of taxes in our government. First of all, we have to note that it is the greatest source of government revenue. This is where the government gets its largest percentage of revenue. It also is deducted from a worker's income before he receives a paycheck. So taxes, income taxes, personal income taxes are actually taken out before you even see your paycheck. So when you do get your paycheck, you have to remember you're actually making a little bit more, but it's being taken out by taxes. Now, income taxes are taken out by your employer and then deposited in a Federal Reserve Bank, the government's banking account. These taxes are then reconciled with your individual deductions, those claims or exemptions that you make each year, and then you have to pay the difference, or you will receive money back once you file your income taxes every year with the IRS by April 15th. Now, in recent years, there have been many debates about whether Christians should actually pay their taxes, especially since so much of our government money is going towards programs that many Christians argue they cannot support. They do not wish to have their taxes going to support this. So some Christians say that because the money is going to unscriptural programs and funds, therefore they refuse to pay their taxes. However, the Bible indicates that Christians are still supposed to pay their taxes, even if the government is corrupt, even if the government is using the money for unscriptural programs. We as Christians are to pay our taxes because it is a testimony, a means of testimony, and a means of showing that we respect, that we are submissive to our government. Now, in Matthew 17, we find an account where tax collectors in Capernaum demanded that Peter, or asked Peter, if he and Jesus were going to pay their taxes. Jesus then instructed Peter on how to pay the tax. And we find that in Matthew 17:27, where it says, "Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast in an hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take, and give unto them for me and thee." Now Christ was paying his taxes in this manner, as he told Peter to do. He said he was doing it in order not to be an offense to the tax collectors, to the people around him, and he was showing his submission to a human government, to Caesar's government at that time. He was submitting to the government authority in order to have a good testimony to not only the tax collectors, but other individuals, those who were following him, and to his disciples, such as Peter. Now, we should follow Christ's example too, and we should pay our taxes just as Christ did, even if we sometimes do not agree with where the money is going. If we don't agree with where the money is going, then we should use the avenues open to us to try to change where that money is being spent. Elect officials who will uphold programs that are biblical, that we would support, and we should still be submissive to that government. And one way of showing that, of being a good testimony, is to pay our taxes. And so we can look to the Bible even for principles or instruction on such human matters as taxes and our governments. Now, note back on our diagram about taxes. We notice that the next to personal income taxes, we saw that Social Security taxes make up the next largest portion of our government revenues. So now let's switch our attention to Social Security taxes. These taxes are actually required by a federal act, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, or FICA. It's usually listed as FICA on your returns or on particular government forms. Again, these taxes are deducted before you receive your paycheck, so they are taken out of your wages before you receive any income. But this type of tax is actually a shared contribution. Both you and your employer must pay Social Security taxes. So this is paid by the employee, taken out before you receive your tax, your paycheck, but it is also in part paid by the employer, who must set aside matching contributions to what is taken out of your income, and both of those, your contribution and your employer's, go into a specific account, the Social Security account, which will then be invested, and when you retire, it will pay you, the government will pay you a monthly check based on the amount that you are entitled to receive, which is a very complicated equation based on how long you've worked, how much you contributed, and your age and various other issues. Now, Social Security is not meant to be a complete retirement program, although most Americans have come to view Social Security as such. Instead, it was first of all initiated to provide benefits or just a little extra help to those who have retired, those who are no longer receiving a consistent income. So it is basically an extra benefit, but it has become a fund or a benefit given by the government. That's why it's often wise, and many financial advisors will suggest that you also save additional amounts from your paycheck each paid time or each month to make sure that you are supplementing this government benefit to provide for your own retirement account. Now, Social Security taxes are actually considered mandatory because they come from a piece of legislation, the FICA law, and therefore Social Security benefits are seen as earned rights. It's mandatory that you pay into them, therefore you have earned the right to receive Social Security when you retire. Interestingly though, when it comes to Social Security taxes, there is a cap on the amount of taxes that you pay. After you earn $84,900 as a yearly income, there will be no increase in the percentage of taxes that you have to pay as your income continues to increase. So, for example, if someone was earning $84,900 a year, they would pay the same amount in Social Security taxes as someone who is earning $1 million a year. So up to that $84,900, you actually pay more Social Security taxes as your income increases. But after that point, it's one flat percentage. So no matter how much your income rises after that point, you will still pay the same amount, the same percentage in Social Security taxes. Just a little something interesting there about taxes that one day you will be looking at on your own paycheck or your yearly report, the W-2 that you'll get. Now, next on our diagram were corporation taxes, which actually are a very small percentage, but still a very prominent area that we need to focus on. Corporation taxes are actually taken out after all expenses for the business have been paid. So these taxes come out of the profits that your business, your corporation has made after you have paid off all of your expenses for that year. Now, since corporation taxes actually come out after all other expenses have been paid, businesses they organize their expenses and their profits each year so that they can actually lower or minimize their tax burden. So they depend on their profits to pay off many of their expenses so that at the end they have a lower or smaller amount of profit from which the taxes will be taken. Now, in 2003, the corporate taxes accounted for about $131 billion of the total federal tax receipts. So it's a very small portion, but still it's a very considerable amount of money that comes in from the businesses. Now, that makes up roughly just about 6% of all the tax receipts that our government receives. But it's interesting to note that that amount of corporate taxes has actually been declining since about the 1950s. So in other words, since about the 1950s, corporations, businesses have actually been paying fewer and fewer taxes, or at least the corporate taxes are making up a much smaller slice of our government revenues or the tax revenues going to our government. Then we come to our final specified area of taxes on the chart that I showed you. This is the area of excise taxes. Now, excise taxes are actually those taxes paid on target consumer goods, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. These taxes also provide the least amount of revenue for our government, so it's the very smallest percentage of tax revenues coming into our government. Now, these taxes are on target consumer goods. When we mean target consumer goods, we're talking about specific consumer goods, things that you as an individual would buy to consume, to use almost immediately. Such things in this category would be gasoline, tobacco, and alcoholic beverages. Things that maybe are not as necessary to daily living, and therefore they are still considered target consumer goods. It's also interesting to note that usually these taxes are added into the total price of the good. Say, for example, when you go to buy a tank of gasoline, the tax is already added into the price that you see advertised on the pump. Therefore, you do not have to count it up at the end of the year. You do not have to report it or pay it month by month like you do your other taxes. It's included in the total sale, the total price of that good. But it is still a tax that eventually will go to the government and makes up part of the government's tax revenues for the year. Now, besides these federal taxes, because that's what we've been focusing on in this group that we've been looking at, these are federal taxes. They make up the federal budget revenues, what goes to our federal government. But we also have to pay taxes for the state and local governments as well, because they also have to provide certain services, certain products, certain goods to individuals under their care or within their borders. Therefore, their revenue is also coming from taxes. So let's first look at the state level. What taxes do we pay on the state level? To begin with, we usually have to still pay income taxes to the state, and we usually have sales taxes as well. Now, state governments also get their revenue from taxes, as I said, just like the federal government. But state taxes are not a specific amount. They're not set. In fact, they differ from state to state, depending on the various contributions, the various conditions within those states, and the various constitutions that those states have chosen and have included or worked in the taxing into those constitutions. For example, some states do not have additional income tax above or in addition to the federal income tax, but most states do. Then some states do not use sales tax. They get all of their tax money, their revenues, from the income tax and do not have an additional sales tax. And even in the states that do have additional sales taxes, the percentages of that tax differs from state to state. Sometimes those states without an additional income tax will have a higher sales tax or a much larger property tax in order to make up for the absence of the income tax. But we also have to remember that not only are these taxes going into making the state government's revenues or budget, but the states also receive revenue or money from the federal government through grants and other means of giving government money, federal money, to the states as well. So the states sort of have a budget made up of not only tax revenues, but also government federal grants as well. Then on the local level, we have other sales taxes that we need to look at. We have property taxes and often additional local sales taxes on the very local level, the level closest to where you live every day. Now, property taxes are taxes that are levied on a house that you own, some land, or even possibly a vehicle that you own. And once again, property taxes must be paid each year, just like your income taxes or like other specific taxes, Social Security taxes. But this is paid to the local area. It goes only to your local region or local level of government. Now again, sales taxes on the local level may be in addition to state sales taxes, or they may not be in existence at all. It's the sales taxes are what are added into each purchase you make. Now they're different from the excise taxes because sales taxes are not added into the total cost or price of that good. Sales taxes are actually added on once your whole purchase is totaled up. And then you'll have 5% or 6% tax on that whole purchase. That is the sales tax that is added. Once again, usually you have that on the state level. Some states may also have it on a local level, so you would have an additional sales tax. Again, the amounts for these local sales taxes will differ from locality to locality, from state to state. And so it all depends on the level of government that you're dealing with, how much revenue it needs, where it wishes to get that revenue from. Usually the proceeds from a sales tax, whether it's on the state level or on the local level, is actually shared between both the state and the local level of government. So they share that revenue from the sales tax. They also give a very small percentage back to the merchants who have to collect it in the first place. Merchants who actually have to make sure it's added into your total purchase. So even the merchants, those stores, get a very small percentage of that sales tax back to them for actually collecting it in the first place. Now, taxes not only are categorized in this area, whether it's federal, state, local, and then within those various government branches, the different types of taxes we have. We also can categorize taxes based on their classification or the proportion that those taxes take from a person's income, especially as that income rises. What does the tax proportion do? Does it rise? Does it go down? Does it stay the same? In the same way, we can note that while we're talking mainly about personal taxes, personal income taxes, when we're talking about tax classifications, we can note that these classifications also apply to business taxes. They are classified in much the same way based on the proportion they take from the income. Now, we have to note right off that not all taxes are equal. In fact, the tax situation existing in America would be considered very unequal because it differs from state to state, even from individual to individual, because it's based on your income, how much you make. In fact, the federal personal income tax was added as an amendment to the Constitution, because when it was first proposed as just a legislation, a piece of legislation from Congress, the Supreme Court struck it down because it was unequal. They said it was unconstitutional because it was not equally applied to all of the states. Instead, it was levied on individual incomes. Therefore, Congress had to go back and add it as an amendment to the Constitution. So it would be constitutional to have a tax levied on individuals and on what they make instead of equally applied to all states within our union. So to begin with, let's look at the first type, or the first way we can classify taxes. The first category is what we call a proportional tax. Now, a proportional tax can also be called a flat tax because it means you are paying the same percentage of your earnings regardless of what your income is or regardless of where you live. We call it a flat tax because it applies, the same percentage applies to everyone. Everyone pays the same percentage of their income in these taxes regardless of how much income they make. Of course, this means even with a flat tax that your percentage might take a larger part of your income if your income is larger, or as your income increases, it may take more from your income, but it is still the same percentage that is applied to your neighbor next door. For example, let's say we have a proportional tax in America, a flat tax of 10%. So 10% of your income will always go to your federal government as a personal income tax. So if you make $10,000 a year, you will pay $1,000 in taxes at the end of the year. If you make $1 million in America, you still pay 10% in taxes, but it's a larger portion out of your income. You will now pay $100,000 in taxes, which is 10% of 1 million. So it's the same proportion, the same percentage, but it actually may take a larger chunk based on how much of an income or how much your income is each year. Now, it's interesting to note that the sales taxes found in many states would qualify or would be a good example of a proportional tax because it is the same percentage applied to every sale, applied to every individual, regardless of what they make or regardless of how much they purchase. Tithing is another example of a proportional tax. Although we don't consider it a tax, it would follow the guidelines of a proportional tax. We are encouraged throughout the Bible to give 10%, the first 10% of all that we make or have as a tithe, give it back to the Lord. Anything above that 10% would be considered an offering, an additional offering, a free will offering it may be called. So some people suggest that our national taxes should be set as a proportional tax, a flat tax of 10%. We really should not be having to pay more in taxes than the Lord requires in tithe. So a flat tax is one set percentage applied to everyone, regardless of their situation, regardless of their income. And keep in mind the examples I gave you of what would fall under a proportional tax. Now, as we end today's lesson, let's take a moment to look at Hungary. Would it be a possibility as a nation for an international business started in America? You see, after World War II, Hungary was under communist control of the Soviet Union. But that country was also one of the leading nations when it went to throw off communism in the late 1980s. So how has it fared since 1989? Let's see.
You know what? I'm starting to get kind of hungry. Is it about dinner time yet?
It's not even close to dinner time. All you ever think about is food. But I can help you out a little by sharing Hungary's very impressive GDP, which is just around $140 million. They have a per capita of nearly $14,000.
That's pretty impressive, especially considering where Hungary has come from. Since they became a free market economy, they've seen enough growth to pay off all their international loans. And since 2002, the private sector has come to control 40% of the nation's capital resources.
They were a communistic country for a while, right?
Oh, for a while. Until the 1990s, communistic practices dominated the entire country, including its economics. Well, now they're a democracy, and I think they've even recently joined the European Union.
Well, they have fertile land, so agriculture plays a big part in their economy. They don't have to import any food, and they even export quite a bit, too.
They have a lot of minerals, too, but they're not mining them right now. There's a low international demand for minerals, and they're trying to build up other industries.
Well, I know they're really trying to become more industrialized. I think Germany has a successful vehicle plant over there that's really helping them out.
Yes, Germany has helped them out quite a bit. And now they're even exporting pharmaceuticals, clothing, leather goods. But I know Hungary is still looking for even more foreign involvement.
Well, that's great for us.
Yes, especially considering their location. They have a great location, the center of southeastern Europe.
So they could use our plant. Could they use our product?
Well, the vehicle industry could definitely use roller chains. And as their other industries grow, they could use our product as well. I mean, not to mention the fact that they're surrounded by 7 other countries. We could use them to export to those other countries.
Well, there were doubts when they started their reforms, but it seems like they're working. I wonder if any American companies have already gone to Hungary. It really seems like something could be done.
So what do you think about Hungary as a prospective nation for an international business? Well, it is pretty impressive that they've already paid off their national debt, especially when you look at the size of America's national debt. And it's also interesting that your book points out the fact that foreign trade as well as foreign aid will help countries like Hungary and even Austria and other countries in the middle of Europe as they try to make that transition from communism into capitalism. So I guess that's a country to keep our eye on for the future. But for now, let's look at your assignment for today's lesson. Today's assignment is for you to read the text, pages 231 through 232, and then do the section review on page 232.